Hi, everyone. My name is Lynn Vu. I am your instructor for Anthropology 103, Introduction to Cultural Anthropology. This is a summer 2 semester course. Our class begins today, which is Tuesday, June 20th, and it goes on for 8 weeks, concluding on August 13th. Sunday, August 13th is when grades are due. So we have a lot of information to cover in a short amount of time. So what I'll do in this video is a few things. First, I will review with you what to expect from this class. We'll go over what the weekly schedule will look like, what I expect from you and what you can expect from me. And then we'll deep dive into the basics. What is anthropology, specifically cultural anthropology? What purpose does it serve for you as a student in this class, regardless of what major you're interested in or what your career path is? Anthropology really is for everyone. So I will explain all of that later. Okay, so to begin with a little bit about myself, I have been at Rock Valley College since 2018, so that is about 5 years. I have two positions at RVC. My first full-time position is Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Specialist. So I work in the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion on the second floor of the Student Center. And my part-time job is an adjunct anthropology faculty teaching this class, specifically cultural anthropology. So I have my bachelor's degree, Bachelor's of Science, BS degree in anthropology in Santa Clara, from Santa Clara University in 2005. And I went on to graduate school. I did enter a doctorate program in cultural anthropology at the University of Illinois, Irvine. And I decided that I really liked teaching and not so much research. So at that point, I left the program with my master's. So I have a master's of arts in anthropology, and then I went into education. So that was in 2010. And since then, I've been doing a variety of different things in the education industry. So I was a middle school science teacher in the west side of Chicago. I did that for a few years. And then I was a center director at a tutoring center. Then I went and became an admissions counselor at a graduate school in psychology. And then I came out to Rockford in 2018. I started as an early college coordinator. So I work with dual credit students or high school students taking college credit at RVC. And then recently, in the past 2 years, I took on the position of specialist in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and also started teaching anthropology. So anthropology since the beginning is my passion. Even though I am not a practicing anthropologist, every position I've been in, every job position I've been in, basically every day meeting people, I draw from what I learned from anthropology and all of the basic concepts of cultural diversity, of cultural relativism. There's so many things that I draw from every day from anthropology. So I know you might think, I'm not interested in anthropology, don't know too much about anthropology, but for instance, I want to be an engineer or a nurse or any other careers in the future. Believe it or not, many anthropological skills and methods will be very, very useful in those fields and basically any field. So in any case, I'm very happy to be here and to be your instructor. I will share more about my research interests and about my own cultural background as the class continues. And you'll notice too that as we go through the class lectures and we talk about different topics, we'll talk about family, gender, um, political anthropology, all those things, you will realize that, hey, I too have some personal experiences related to these topics. That's great. What I want you to do is as we go through this class, I will share some of my cultural background, but I want you to think also about your own cultural background, your upbringing, all of that, and bring it into the class too. Many of the assignments that we're going to do is going to require you, are going to require you to self-reflect and think about yourself and your experiences and share it in the assignment. So do not leave your cultural identities at the door, so to speak, for this class. Please bring it with you to make this class engaging. All right. So having said that, I am going to go ahead and share my screen, and then we'll talk about, let's take a look at the Eagle course first so I can show you what to expect. So while I'm trying to find the share button to my screen, you'll notice one of my cats in the background. Her name is Mila. I actually have 5 pets. I have 3 cats and 2 dogs. So just a heads up, you may have an impromptu visit from one or more of them as we have our lectures. So just a heads up, that may happen. All right, and as it happens, I will introduce them to you. All right, so let me go ahead and share the screen. I am going to switch over to the student view. So the view that I'm looking at right now is the instructor view. The view now should be what you are seeing on your end as a student. All right. So again, welcome to A&P 103. The section is 20A01 for summer 2. Some of you may be familiar with working with Eagle, which is our online learning management system. Some of you are old hats. You've been here a few semesters and you know the ins and outs of Eagle, but I just wanted to review some basics for everyone, regardless of how well you know Eagle. So this is our landing page, our home page. You'll see here as a student for our class, there's going to be 5 links here. These are the main links that you will access the most often in this class. This is the home page. There's going to be modules. Each week is going to have 1 module. So there's 8 weeks for this class. There will be 8 modules for this Eagle class. Okay. Always check your grades. Grades are always going to be posted. For every assignment, I try to grade them within the week. So I don't want to wait until the end of the semester to grade because first of all, that is not good for you as a student. Most students want to know how they're doing as they're going along, so there's no surprises. And for 2, second thing is that's too much grading for me to do. So I'd rather break it up into pieces and grade as we go along. So that's what you can expect from me if you're turning in an assignment that's due on Sunday. And you'll see in a bit that nearly all of our assignments are due before midnight on Sunday. So what I'll do is during the week, if it's due on Sunday, the following week I'll grade, and by that weekend you should have a score for the assignment that you turn in this that past Sunday. Okay, I will make some announcements. If there's any updates in the class, major deadlines coming up, I'll make sure that everyone is in the know. So make sure to check that. And also, the syllabus is a big deal. The syllabus is basically my contract to you in terms of what I can promise to deliver for the class and what I'm expecting from you as a student. It also has fine print on policies and procedures. If you're not sure, for instance, if you can turn work in late, check the syllabus. If you're not sure what the points or grading system is for this class, check the syllabus. Yeah, so all the information is in the syllabus, so make sure that you download a copy, but you'll also know that there's always a link here in case you need to reference it online. All right, a neat feature of Eagle is that on the right-hand side, there's a cool to-do list. It will tell you all of the assignments that are due for a given week. So this is week 1 of the semester. You'll see here, 1, 2, 3. There's actually 3 assignments that are due by the end of this week. And end of this week is this Sunday before midnight. I'll go over these in detail with you later, but there's a personal introduction piece. There's a reflection activity and a second reflection activity. Okay, reflection activity 1 and 2. So you'll see here the deadline is Sunday, June 25th at 11:59. All of the 3 assignments are due June 25th before midnight. Okay. So, and every new week, you'll see new assignments pop up here. I don't usually for our weeks, week 1 is going to have more assignments than usual. Usually I have 1, 2 assignments top. But the assignments for this week is more introductory, so there's 3 of them. But what you can expect for the norm is 1 or 2 assignments per week, okay, not 3. All right, so getting started. Just some notes here on what to check. So again, the announcements, check your inbox. I will be sending updates to the class via the announcements function, but also the inbox, which is the email system within Eagle. If I need to send a private message to you, like if I have a question for you, or whatever it is, or if you want to reach out to me, do use the inbox function. Okay, that way you're messaging me from within the RVC system. I discourage folks from emailing me using your personal email. Those tend to go to the junk folder in my inbox. So you might say, Lynn, I emailed you last week, but if you use your personal email, I might not have read it. So make sure to inbox me through this function over here, inbox, instead of emailing with your personal account. All right. Make sure to check Eagle for a visual overview of your course deadlines. I will click that in a bit so you can see. And the modules link, which is right over here, is where you can access all of our course content. So that's where everything is stored, everything meaning the assignments that are due, the readings that are expected for a certain week, any other extra materials like articles, videos, all of that will be in the module section, okay? So before I continue, I want to click on, since we're talking about the Eagle calendar, I will click just that. So the calendar function here. So our class begins on the 9th or the 20th. Okay, I'm recording this the day before, so you'll see that it's shaded out on the 19th. But our class starts on the 20th. And when again are assignments due? Yes, you're right. If you said Sunday before midnight. So you'll see here, those 3 assignments that we saw on the home page, they're due on the 25th. Okay, so let's go to July. You'll start to see a pattern here. Oh, actually, you can't see it yet. Sorry. As I open the modules, and you'll see a message later that will say each week, after you finish the week, the module for the following week will open up. So it'll be module by module by module. This means that you won't be able to access all of the course materials for the entire semester up front. I will open it strategically the week that that it's available. You might say, but Lynn, Professor Vu, by the way, you can call me Lynn, Professor Vu, Miss Vu, all of that's fine. You may say, Lynn, I want to study ahead. I don't want to sit around. I want to make sure that I'm on top of the course materials. I'll say, yep, you can definitely do that. Check the syllabus. It will show you the readings for the next week. Okay, so I don't want students to get ahead too far. It's great if you're on task and you're a little bit ahead, but the goal here is to not speed through the content, but to really immerse yourself in it. Take your time with it. let it absorb, okay? Because this is a brief 8-week course, the material is going to fly by very quickly. The goal isn't to just get it done and forget about everything, which I understand. Sometimes that happens. But my goal is for you to focus the best you can on the material you have for that week and then really engage in it and then move on to the next. I promise the assignments are not very long-winded. They're not very complicated. It's pretty straightforward. So don't worry about getting it done. I really want you to focus on the quality of it. Okay. In any case, on this calendar, as the weeks open up, you'll see the assignments are all due on Sundays. Okay. So that's what you would see. All right. So I'm going to go back to the home page. All right, here we are. So what to expect? This class is online and asynchronous. That means that we don't have a specific meeting time. We don't meet face to face. It's all online at your own pace. Okay. So everything is assigned through this module. And if you're the type of person who wants to have that interaction, even though it's an online course, I do have office hours every Friday. I'll get to that in a bit. It's a little bit down there, but I can do virtual office hours. I can meet in person. I do have an office on campus in the student center, the second floor. So if you prefer to meet face to face, I am more than happy to do so. Okay, so it is an online asynchronous course, but if you want to speak with me in live time, whether that's over the phone, via Zoom, or in person, I'm more than happy to do that. Just let me know. All right. So other things to expect from this class. The textbook for this class that we're using, the cool thing is that it is free. You do not need to pay for it. It is available online. It is required. So I know some students think, oh, it's free, it's online. It's probably not something I need. No, it is required. All of our assignments, our final is going to draw from material from that textbook. So do make sure you can access it online or download it or print it out. Okay, the link is right here. Okay, where it says you can access, reprint the textbook here, go ahead and click on that link. Again, a new module will unlock every Sunday at 11:59 p.m. Okay, all discussion and reflection assignments are due by Sunday at 11:59 p.m. of the week they are assigned. You will have weekly readings aside from the textbook. There will also be supplemental articles and videos, and sometimes some audio that you can listen to or read the transcript from, along with the textbook readings. Okay. This is, again, this is like the third time I've said it, but this is a very brief course. It's very fast paced. So make sure that you stay on top of your assigned readings and work. In the class discussions and activities that we'll have, be respectful, conscious, and courteous. Okay, that just means be aware that everyone here is here to learn. And so we don't know everything, and that's okay. I'm not expecting you to. Be open-minded and engage in class and know that others are doing the same. I don't like it when folks email me or message me the day before grades are due and say, hey, is there any extra credit? Or hey, can I turn in late work? You should be keeping track of your grades every week as we go along. Okay. So if you have questions or need help, which is absolutely fine, that's something, some of the course material is going to be straightforward. Some might be a little bit tricky or complex. So if you need help, or if something in your brain is going, not computing, this does not make sense, please let me know. Okay. This is an online class and asynchronous class, so I may never see you in person, but I really want to hear from you. My philosophy is that I'd rather hear too much from you than hear not at all from you. Okay, so don't be afraid that I will get sick of hearing from you. or if you're afraid to bother me, please, by all means, bother me, okay? So if you have questions, let me know. But first, of course, refer to the course syllabus for expectations and deadlines. Do read it over. A big question that students ask me is, do you accept late work? I'll leave that as a cliffhanger. Read the course syllabus and you tell me if I accept late work. Okay, so that's a little bit of homework or a scavenger hunt there. Okay, so inbox me or email me. I prefer inbox over here, but you can always email me at my RVC account. Office hours, you can just hop onto Zoom. There's a Zoom link here that you just click on. I will be on that Zoom link Fridays, 1:30 to 2:30 p.m. Okay, every Friday throughout and for the entire semester. If you prefer to meet me in person, I will be in my office Fridays 1:30 to 2:30, so you can come to say hello to me. Again, I'm on the second floor of the Student Center, room 2102. Now, if you're working or have other classes Friday afternoons, don't worry about it. If you still want to see me for office hours or talk with me, let me know. I will be happy to schedule another day or another time to meet with you. Okay. All right. So that's a lot of information. Don't worry if you don't remember it because it is contained on our homepage. So let's go ahead and go to the modules. I'm going to collapse all of them so you can get a bird's eye view of it. So each week, with the exception of this first week, each week will have its own module. So week 1 has actually 2. There's week 1A and 1B, okay? And then the other weeks, week 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 will have their own modules, okay? So if I were to expand all, the one that you'll see first is just this week. So week 1A, there's going to be the lecture recording, which is where you're viewing this right now. That will be contained in this link. And then there's a reading section, things that you need to read for that week. So there's a little blurb about me, some background information about me, the course syllabus again. It's so important, it keeps popping up. There's the link to the textbook. So I highly recommend for you to save this link or bookmark it. But if you forget where it is, you can always go back to this module and click here. These over here are not clickable. They're not links. This is just telling you, okay, now that you have the textbook, read chapter 1. These are the page numbers, and read chapter 2. Those are the 2 main readings that are required, content readings that are required for week 1. Okay, and here are the 3 assignments. You can click on them to read directions or read the instructions for them and submit them in each of the links here. Okay. So what's unique about week 1 is there's a second section here. These are course tools. There's nothing due here. This is just a module of resources for you to use, okay? Even though whether you're a newbie to RVC or you've been here a few semesters, I still want you to go down this list to check it out. Chances are there's something here that you've never realized was there before in terms of resources. So for the newbies, if you want some tips on how to navigate this learning management system, click here to how to navigate Eagle. If you have some tech issues, click here. There's tech support. And did you know that all RVC students can download for free Microsoft 365 suite, which means Word, PowerPoint, Excel, all of that. If you don't know, now you know. So click this link, download it for yourself. If you don't already have Microsoft 365, you will need Microsoft 365 because all of the documents that you'll be turning in, well, most of them will be a Word document, or that's what's required. So make sure that you have Microsoft Word, okay? Other resources, Tutoring Center, Writing Center, just know where they are. We will be basically, this class, there's a lot of writing. reflections. There's actually a research assignment as well. So make sure that you're okay with your writing, you're strong with your writing. Now, I am not an English instructor, so I'm not going to grade you for grammar nor spelling. However, if there's too many grammar and spelling mistakes and I can't read your work and I can't understand what you're trying to say, then your grade goes down. Okay, so I'm not going to grade you on the logistics and technical pieces of writing, but I really want to know what you're saying, and so make sure that it's clear. Okay. We also have chosen preferred name change policies. So if that's something that you're interested in, click on that. We do have free for all students. So if you're taking this class, you are a student. You can have access to personal and success counseling here at RVC. So do click on that for more information. Also, do's and don'ts of emailing your instructor. There's this neat list of do's and don'ts of how to communicate with your instructor, not just with me, but in general. These are just it's email etiquette that you can use not just for this class, but for your other classes, and just good rules of thumb for writing professional emails. Okay. And we will be having different assignments. The majority of them will be either reflection assignments where you write and you reflect upon the reading or the video that you'll see and then reflect on yourself. So those are called reflection assignments. We'll also have virtual discussions, which is similar to the reflections. You will reflect on yourself and also a reading, but you will be commenting or responding to one other classmate's post. Okay, so those are the two main types of activities we'll be doing for this class. Here are the rubrics so you know what to expect. Okay, or you know what I'm expecting from those activities. Okay, you'll see here as we go down week 2, week 3, and so on. There's no content there yet because they're not unlocked yet. So as as the new week opens up, the module information will open up here too. Okay, so as you can see for week 1, there's already plenty for you to work on. So don't worry about getting ahead. If you do, that's great, but that's not the point. Just focus on what's in front of you. And if you really want to, and you have time to go ahead, great. I'm not going to hinder you there. Let me see here. I hope this will open up. So if you click on the syllabus, okay, there's a lot of important information here, but what I'm trying to get at is this portion here about detailed weekly topic schedule. So while week 2 and 2 all the way through week 8 aren't open, you can still get a sneak peek of what to expect. So for instance, week 2, we'll be reviewing chapter 3 of the textbook. And there's a video that you need to watch. You don't have access to that video yet, nor this webpage on the American Anthropological Association Statement on Ethics, but you can get started on chapter 3. Okay. And same thing with the other weeks. There's some things you may be able to access, but by and large, if you want to go ahead, I recommend that you read the textbook first for context. Okay. All right. I am going to transition now. If you have any questions, let me go back to home, about the overall structure of this course, about the syllabus, about my policies, please inbox me. I do respond relatively quickly. I do respond within 24 hours. Again, please bother me. Bother me. You're never bothering me, but please, quote unquote, bother me if you have any questions. All right. So I'm going to pivot now and let me go ahead and switch the share. Let's go to the content. Okay. So week 1. These are the things that I have or will be covering in this recording. So what to expect from this course, we just finished that. The 2 main things that we'll talk about are the subfields of anthropology, and then we'll deep dive into intro to, and we'll talk about the beginnings of cultural anthropology specifically. And then we'll also talk about this idea of culture, right? So you'll hear this word culture so often during our class. It's very important to define it to start off with. Okay, so we'll focus on that today. Do Sunday, again, those three assignments: a personal introduction. There's instructions in the link when you get there. And then two activities. One is a reflection on this video that you'll be watching called The Danger of a Single Story. It's a TED Talk. If you love TED Talks, which I do, you'll love this class. They're very poignant, brief lectures from the top researchers in the field, and it delivers a lot of important information in a very guttural way. Okay, so that's what this reflection one is going to be about, a TED Talk called The Danger of a Single Story. And then there's a discussion activity called Circles of My Cultural Self. Okay, more details are given in each of these links when you click on them in Eagle. Okay. All right, so learning objectives. What are we going to do? I mentioned earlier, very briefly, we're going to talk about the 4 subfields of anthropology. Cultural anthropology, which is this class, is only 1 out of 4. Okay, so we'll discuss all 4. We'll define culture and also the 6 characteristics of culture, or the 6 things that have to be present in order if we're talking about a specific culture. Okay, we'll talk about some history, some origins. We'll describe how anthropology developed from early explorations of the world through the 19th century. And then this very important concept of ethnocentrism. Okay, we'll define it, and then we'll talk about how early anthropologists used ethnocentric thoughts to analyze early cultures, and how and this will actually dovetail into the TED Talk video activity, The Danger of a Single Story. The concept of ethnocentrism will be explored more in the activity. Okay. All right. So big question. What is anthropology? Why are you taking this class, right? So let's start with the basics. Let's dissect the word and take it apart, shall we? So anthropos is human, okay? Anything that has the prefix anthro means human or human-like, okay? And any ology, whether it's biology, psychology, any of that is the study of. So anthropology then is the study of humans. Okay, you may think of evolution, right? Many people tend to think of anthropology as sticks and stones, as archaeology. You're studying the origins of humans. Yes, but not only. Okay. Anthropology is very broad. That's actually the beauty of it. That's why I'm in love with anthropology. It's rightfully very broad. If you're going to study humans, humans are not simple by any stretch of the imagination. We are so messy and complex. It's awesome. So if you want to study humans, you have to study the whole lot of it. So anthropology studies humanity, studies everything and anything that makes us human. Okay, so take a look at this word cloud. These are just little bits and pieces of what anthropology studies. So some big words here we see: globalization, modernity, identity, kinship, politics, so many things. Okay, so if you, at this point, you may feel one of two things. You may feel super excited because there's going to be so many different angles that we're going to study humans. So that's one thing you may feel. Or the second thing you may feel is overwhelmed, right? How can a discipline be so messy and kind of interdisciplinary, right? So if you're feeling one or the other, or you're feeling both, perfect. That is completely natural. We'll talk about what makes anthropology unique within the social sciences, but one of the things that make it unique is the fact that it's so multidisciplinary too. Okay, that's a strength, I would argue. All right, so let's talk about the four fields. There's biological anthropology, archaeology, linguistic anthropology, and cultural anthropology. Again, this is a cultural anthropology class, so we're only focusing on that specific subset. We do have, RVC does have another course called A&P 102, which is biological anthropology. So those are the two at this time. There are only two anthropology courses offered at Rock Valley, this cultural anthro class and the biological anthro. I highly recommend taking both, just to put it out there, okay? So I will go over each of these briefly just so you can get a bird's eye view of what these four subfields are like. But there's also another field called applied anthropology. So applied anthropology, applied, you think applying concepts, right? So applied anthropologists can do any of the four subfields here. They can be a biological anthropologist, they can be a linguist, they can be an archaeologist or a cultural anthropologist. But one thing that distinguishes them is that they work in the they work maybe in the public or private sector. They're applying these academic concepts to real world issues, okay? So for the most part, there's four academic subfields, but there's also one practical subfield called applied anthropology, okay? I have another visual to help. For those who are visual, I'll have another image to organize this information a few slides later. Okay, so let's talk about biological anthropology. Okay, so biological anthropologists, they study, whoops, there's a little typo there, study the study of. So biological anthropologists study human origins, they study evolution, they study adaptation, human adaptation, and variation. So those of you who are science nerds, you love biology, chemistry, physics, all of that, this might be your cup of tea. Okay, so you're studying those concepts, but you're applying them to humans specifically. So what types of research questions do biological anthropologists ask? Here are a few. One is, what did human ancestors look like? What were their bone structures? What was their anatomy like? How did it change over time? Okay. Also, looking beyond just humans and extending it to primates. So how are humans connected to other primate species? We're talking about like chimpanzees, other apes. So you know, if someone tells you that we evolved from chimpanzees, that's completely wrong. There are contemporaries. We're living in the same time frame, but millions of years ago, there was a common ancestor. So how does that family tree look like? So that's what biological anthropologists study. Okay. They also study basically population genetics. So what genotypic and phenotypic diversity exists between people from different regions of the world. For instance, if you think about skin tone, it's much more complex than different country or different continents having different skin tones. It's all a gradation. Okay, so and also why do certain communities of people have there's a higher rate of certain genetic disorders than other populations. Okay, so those are things that biological anthropologists concern themselves with. They need to have knowledge of cultures, but they also need to have a strong foundation of science in the background. Okay, so that's the field of biological anthropology. Here's a visual to encapsulate the different fields of study or strands of study under the umbrella term of biological anthropology. So you have primatology, studying of primates. You have paleoanthropology. So paleo means way ancient, way back then. So we're studying ancient humans. Okay. You have bioarchaeology. So you are studying human remains. Okay. Molecular anthropology, you do need knowledge of molecular biology to talk about human variation. Okay. Forensic anthropology is pretty cool. Anything that has the word forensic means it's tied to the law. So forensic anthropologists are quite cool. They study specifically human remains, and they are specialists in skeletal identification for humans. So you'll see that if you've ever watched like Forensic Files or some other true crime shows, you'll see that forensic anthropologists can be called in to examine a body if it's decomposed and all there are skeletal remains. It's pretty cool. And also human biology. So it doesn't need to be ancient or dead people. It could be current people. Why do certain populations have a higher frequency of certain diseases, things like that. So that all falls underneath biological anthropology. Okay, if that sounds cool to you, good. We will in the textbook there are other examples, so do make sure to review that. And we do have another anthropology class at RVC. Make sure to check that class out. A&P 102. All right, so the another subfield is linguistic anthropology. So linguistics, language, right? So linguistic anthropologists study language, but not just like the words in themselves or letters or the sounds. They study language within the context of culture. How does language play out in certain groups versus other groups? Okay, so one example of a type of research approach that linguists use or linguistic anthropologists use is how did language first emerge? That's where you have to go back and think about the language family tree. Did it involve biology? When humans, early humans, their anatomy changed, their skull and their vertebrae became more upright, right? So how did that affect the other parts of or the other parts that allow humans to speak, like their nasal cavity, their throat, all of that? Okay, very interesting. We're actually going to cover human language in week 3. So that's going to be a very cool week. Okay, next, how does language evolve over time? Okay, so there are certain slang that we have nowadays that 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, it didn't exist, right? So language is a very cultural thing. It changes over time. How did it come to be? How are different vocab words created? Okay. Also, language can convey one's social identity. How does the way someone speak or their accent give you an idea of or give you a story of where they came from? All of those things, okay? And also, interestingly, a good question is, does language shape the way you think? Certain languages have certain terms and grammar structures. A big question that linguistic anthropologists ask is, does that affect the way they view the world based on those structures? Or to what extent does it shape the way you see the world? Okay. Very fascinating questions. The third subfield is archaeology. So many people tend to think of archaeology when they hear anthropology. That's the digging, the bones, the artifacts. So you'll see that in the image below here. So archaeologists study human behavior through the recovery and analysis of material culture. So materials, like the actual stuff that they can uncover. So these are tools, food, pottery, shelters, and yes, even waste. You can tell a lot about how life was for extinct peoples based on the materials that they have around certain areas. Okay, so archaeologists ask different research questions. They ask, how did people in a particular area live? For instance, this particular area might be a desert now, but there's some remnants of tools and of agriculture. So, how did they live at that time and what was the terrain like way back then, thousands of years ago? A big question is when, why, and where was agriculture first developed? That's a big deal because um, early humans were hunters and gatherers, and they're always on the move. So when the first humans started developing agriculture, they started settling down, and because their life was not on the go, they're more sedentary or more not necessarily sedentary, but they're more grounded in a specific area. Lifestyle changes, biology changes, and all of that. So, a very important question that archaeologists ask is agriculture and when it began. Also, how did cities first develop? Cities are very complex, they're very large. How did humans first organize it? What did it look like? Okay, so that's archaeology. All right, the fourth and my favorite, I may be biased, but the fourth subfield of anthropology is cultural anthropology, which is this class. So, cultural anthropologists study the similarities and differences among living societies and cultural groups. So, cultural anthropologists study extant human groups or groups that are still around. Okay. And they do cultural comparisons. So they look at similarities, differences, draw upon theory to talk about those similarities and differences. Okay. So some questions that cultural anthropologists ask are human emotions universal or culturally specific? So we tend to think emotions, you're either sad, happy, angry, whatever it is. We tend to think, well, that's universal, but is it? Is it expressed in different ways in different cultures? Is it even viewed as that same emotion in different cultures? So, this idea of questioning something that is universal, and seeing if how it plays out differently in different communities. Okay. Also, another question. How are family groups organized in different cultures? For instance, in the United States, we are so diverse, but the typical, not all families are like this, but the typical family is nuclear. That's kind of like what our social structure comes to expect of a family unit, right? A nuclear family where there's like two generations living under a household. Of course, that's definitely not all types of households out there. We're very diverse, but how are families organized, right? And what does that say? Also, gender identities are very, very different from one culture to the next. Okay. Some people may think, what do you mean gender? That's something that you're born with, right? Nope. We will deep dive into gender and sexuality towards the end of this class, and we'll talk about how gender is a social construct and it can vary quite widely between cultures. Okay. Another question that cultural anthropologists ask is this idea of national and ethnic identity. What does it mean to be quote unquote American? What does it mean to be Vietnamese? What does it mean to be Chinese, to be Indonesian, to be South African, and so forth? So, this idea of an ethnic identity or national identity, what does that mean? What values are intertwined in that? Where did it come from? Okay, so very, very fascinating questions about the origins of culture and how culture is made, right? All right. So here is a review of those four subfields of anthropology. So you have, again, cultural, biological, linguistic, and archaeology. Okay. Um, the the um, uh, the brief definition of each of those fields are underneath, but you'll also see here that there's a little white box on the bottom that says applied and whatever that subfield is. This is because for every subfield of anthropology, um, you can actually work as not just in academia and doing research, but you can actually work out there in society and maybe work in a company and apply cultural anthropology concepts. An example would be working at IBM or Apple, and helping human resources with any employee issues. So employee issues mainly, for instance, if the company sees that morale is low and that people are leaving, they may want someone from the outside coming in to study, to better understand the culture of that organization and why people are leaving, and then offer solutions on how to improve upon that. Okay. So in each of these four subfields, there's always going to be an applied aspect that you can go out there in the real world and use your principles for real world work. Okay. All right. So those are the four subfields. Let's pivot and talk about this very important word. I've used it several times before. I didn't define it. So let's go ahead and do that now. What is culture? Okay. So, culture is a set of beliefs, practices, and symbols that are learned and shared. Okay. Culture is a set of beliefs, practices, and symbols that are learned and shared. So, a few things here: beliefs, practices, and symbols. We'll go ahead and break those down in a bit and define what those mean. But then also, culture is learned. So, it's not something that you are born with. You're not born knowing how to speak English. You're not born knowing how to dress or what dress according to your gender identity, right? These are things that you pick up from society and those you live around, and you learn it, but also you share. Okay, so culture is something that you can also create as you go along. Okay, so let's define beliefs, practices, and symbols. So culture is a set of beliefs. So those include mental aspects about culture, beliefs about how people ought to be, how different genders should act, right? Or if you're a certain age, there's certain expectations or values expected of you. Okay, so those are beliefs. Every culture has those types of beliefs. Practices are behaviors and actions. Okay, so you practice culture by, for instance, I mean, there's so many things out there, but for instance, um, if you choose to get married, there's a process for that. It can be, you go to the courthouse, right? You go through this procedure, pay whatever it is for your gift certificate, not gift certificate, your marriage license. But then there's also like the wedding ceremony if you do that, right? There's certain customs and activities that you partake in as a member of a culture. Symbols. Every culture has symbols, something that represents a larger, more complex object and idea, right? So this idea of, think of the American flag, right? It's just three colors with different shapes, but it's symbolic. It represents different things. So culture is very non-straightforward sometimes, because it tends to they cultures use symbols to stand for something else that is of value to that culture. Okay, so again, culture is a set of beliefs, practices, and symbols that you learn and that you share. Okay, all of us participate in culture. So, what are the 6 characteristics of culture? So, according to the textbook, there are 6 qualities that cultures must have. Let me take a little water break. Please hold. All right, so let's go over these 6. First, humans have the capacity to learn any culture. Again, this is not something you're born with. This is something that you learn about and that you practice, okay? Every human has the capacity to learn any culture. Second characteristic, culture changes in response to internal and external factors. Culture is never stagnant. Okay, it's always changing. When people say back in the good old days, well, the good old days, like, what do you mean by that? You mean a certain period of time? Well, the good old days were not always the good old days. evolved and changed into that. So there's always going to be change internally within the culture and externally. Okay. So culture is not stagnant. Humans are not bound by culture and can choose to resist or change it. This means that, yes, all of us grow up in a certain culture or certain cultures, but that doesn't mean that we're doomed to be trapped within it and that we are not, we don't have any agency. Culture is something that you learn and you participate in, but you're not bound into it. You can resist it and you can change it if you wish. Sometimes there's repercussions from it by others in your culture if you do that, but there's nothing kind of, you're not locked into any type of culture, if that makes sense. Okay. Another characteristic is that culture is highly symbolic. There's values and belief systems in every culture, and we use symbolism many times to represent what those core values are. Okay. Fifth characteristic, our reliance on culture distinguishes us from other animals and shaped our evolution. So people may say, what's so unique about human culture? Lions have prides or wolves have packs, right? So those are cultures, right? Not necessarily. Culture is much more complex than that. So the fact that humans rely on culture and that we can't really survive without culture, um, and we're very social beings. That's funny to say because I'm introverted, but humans by nature need other humans in different ways. So it doesn't mean that everyone's extroverted. It just means that we rely on each other. Okay. So that reliance on each other, that reliance on culture distinguishes us from different animals. Okay. And it also shaped our evolution to where we are today. Last characteristic of culture is that it is highly intertwined with biology. Okay. You can't talk about human biology without talking about culture. You can't talk about culture without talking about biology. So, if you talk about, for instance, in chapter 3, I believe, or week 3, we're going to be talking about human language. So you can't talk about human language without talking about biology and the anatomical features of the head and the throat that allows for that cultural phenomenon to happen. Okay. Also, if you want to talk about like human variation, um, for instance, those cultures that live near the equator, they tend to have darker, more melanin, darker skin tones that's what they've adapted over time and evolved to adapt to the heat and the sun in that area, because that's where the sun hits the globe the most. So those in that area, they've evolved to have a certain type of skin tone, whereas people in the northern hemisphere or southern hemisphere, over time, sunlight hasn't been an issue, so their skin tone is different. Okay, and because of that, their way of life is different too. So everything is intertwined, biology and culture. Okay, so those are the 6 characteristics of culture. Do know these 6 characteristics. They are, I believe, in chapter 1. You will need that for the exam. All right. Some other things that make anthropology unique. If you remember, at the beginning of the PowerPoint, I mentioned that anthropology is very broad. It studies humans, right? How can, that be broader than that? But uh, there are a few things that make anthropology unique. So these are highlighted here in yellow. One is holism. So in order to study humans and to be an anthropologist, you need to study so many different aspects of human life, basically triangulate different aspects of human life to understand a specific culture. Okay, you need to be holistic in your perspective. Second anthropological mindset is to practice cultural relativism. So if you think relative, that means it's not set in stone. It's dependent on what's going on or the circumstances, right? So cultural relativism is understanding other cultures from the perspective of that own culture. Okay, that means that you're not applying your own cultural values to the culture that you're studying. That is not cultural relativism. That is actually ethnocentrism, and we'll define that later. But anthropologists need to, and anthropology students, which you are, need to practice cultural relativism, which means that you will be asked to study a culture based on the values of that culture, from the perspective of that culture. Okay, as opposed to putting on judgment on that culture. Okay. So another anthropological perspective is that there's going to be a lot of cross-cultural comparisons. So, as we go along in this class and you read the chapters, there's going to be a lot of different case studies of different cultures, so you can see how diverse something is, like this idea of family. It can be so diverse depending on what culture you're referring to. So there's going to be a lot of comparisons made. Other things that distinguish anthropology from other social sciences is, I would argue, the thing that distinguishes it is this idea of field work. Okay, we're talking about methods. And actually, we're going to go deeper into methods next week in week 2. That's all we're going to talk about, anthropological fieldwork methods. Okay, but in general, fieldwork, which is also called ethnography. Okay, ethnography is based on participant observation and descriptive accounts of culture with theory. So fieldwork really requires you to be in the trenches. If you're studying a culture, you're not just reading about them, from articles, from the textbook. You're actually living amongst them, talking to people in that culture, and really immersing yourself in it. Okay, and then you're incorporating anthropological theory to understand your observations too. Okay, so that's a very unique feature of fieldwork of anthropology. That's fieldwork. We'll deep dive into that next week. Okay, another unique stance is that anthropology is very scientific, but it's also humanistic. Okay, so there's this anthropologist, his name is Eric Wolf, and he summarized it very well. I love this quote. He said that anthropology is the most scientific of the humanities, and it's the most humanistic of the sciences. Okay, anthropology is the most scientific of the humanities and the most humanistic of sciences. Okay, so another way of stating that is, for instance, if you talk about biological anthropology, you're going to draw from like a lot of biological science concepts. Okay, while if you're studying cultural anthropology, you're applying a more humanistic approach. You're studying more, instead of thinking about like molecules or chemicals, you're talking more about what is how are how is this community expressing certain values through their practices, through the arts, things like that. So that goes full circle, and that goes back to my love and respect of anthropology. It is so holistic, and humans are so messy and complex that you really do need to have everything in your arsenal to study them. You have to have the hard sciences, you also have to have the humanities to understand humans. Okay, so those are unique anthropological perspectives. Okay, so the big question is, so what? I know you need to take this class for a grade, for credits. You might need it for a non-Western cultural component, or you're taking it because it sounds fun. But what is it? What's in this for you personally? Okay. So why is anthropology important? I'll argue that this is important for everyone because of these reasons. There's many transferable skills. I mentioned earlier in this recording, you can be a physician, you can be electrician, you can be um, anything, and still draw from anthropological skills because um, with the anthropological perspective, you have a broad knowledge and understanding of other cultures. You're more well-rounded in terms of understanding the rich diversity that's out there. Okay. You will be having a big project for this class where you'll be conducting field work yourself. So this, you'll be practicing observing, analyzing, participant observation. These are big skills that will help you immerse yourself in any setting, whether it's like a new workplace, whether it's working in a team for a class assignment. Having those basic communication skills is very great, is very useful for any setting. Critical thinking. You're going to be asked to not take things for face value, and you'll be asking why, right? So why does this culture practice this a certain way? What are the origins? What are the reasons? We want you to dig a little bit deeper, and that skill you need for everything in life. Okay? Clear communication. You're going to be sharing about yourself, like certain aspects of your own cultural background, your experiences, and then you're asked to weave that with the readings that we'll have. So being able to articulate that and communicate that is going to be big, and it's going to help with any field that you go into. Applied problem solving. Chances are, regardless of what field you go into, you're going to be working to different extents with other people, and people from different backgrounds. So how do you apply your understanding of cultural diversity to work with them and work productively with them? Okay. Also, it helps you to look outside your bubble. Some of you may have traveled outside of Illinois. Some of you may have traveled outside of the United States. Great. Some of you may not have. So through this class, even though we're not going to be going on any field trips, you'll be going on mini field trips, at least through textbook examples and videos. So you'll get a better idea of how big and how complicated the world is. Okay, and move away from this idea of ethnocentrism, which we'll define next. Okay. So what is ethnocentrism? It's the tendency to view one's own culture as the most important culture and as the only correct culture and the standard by which to measure other cultures. Okay. That's a fancy way of saying my culture is the best. It is the standard by which everyone should be measured by, and I'm going to judge other cultural beliefs and values and traditions based on my own. Okay, so that is very dangerous for a number of reasons, but mainly it's just not accurate, right? So if you're studying another culture and you want to better understand their religious practices, for instance, you're not going to get too far if you apply your own assumptions of what a good religion, quote unquote, good religion should be on that religion. Okay, so it's not going to yield very good research. The results are not accurate. Okay, so anthropologists must always question themselves. Am I stereotyping? Am I applying assumptions based on my own cultural background to this situation? They're always self-reflecting. Okay, so anthropologists must always be aware of their own ethnocentric thoughts when conducting research. And as anthropology students, that's something that I urge you to practice as well. As you come across and read about different cultures, some of them you're like, yeah, that sounds similar to what I'm used to. And others, you might be, whoa, I did not know that there are groups of people out there who are very different from me. And it might be startling. It also might bring up judgmental feelings. So always check yourself. Okay. So examples of ethnocentric thinking. What are some examples? So for instance, one example um, is because I grew up in the United States. We use a very biomedical approach to illness. And so, if you're sick, you go to a doctor, you get prescribed medication, boom, you should be okay. Other cultures don't use that biomedical approach. They may use chants, they may draw from the spiritual realm to help address illness. So, an ethnocentric way of thinking might be me saying, their medical practices are inferior to mine because I know mine is based in biology and chemistry. Mine is right, theirs is wrong. That is an example of ethnocentric thinking. So to avoid that, a better way of approaching it is saying, I know that I grew up in the United States. This is the way we view things. I'll put that aside. I understand that this culture uses a different approach. Let me understand it from their perspective. Okay, so that's an example there. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pause a little bit. This is a very long recording. Usually my lectures will be just an hour long. We're pushing almost close to 2 hours. This is because there's going to be 2 chapters covered in this recording, but also because there was an intro to the course part at the beginning. So this is longer than usual. If you need to break, pause this video, come back later, I would be fine with that. But the next part, let's deep dive into how did anthropology begin? Okay, so what are its roots? Is this a relatively new field? When did it start? So this idea of studying a group of people or a culture that's different from your own, it's not a new idea. It's been around for thousands of years. So in terms of written record of cultural comparisons, we can look back to thousands of years ago from early travelers in China, as people are traveling and trading goods and foods, they come across people from different backgrounds and they start documenting these differences. And so we can see, we have records of those comparisons going back to 100 BC. And then also in terms of the spice routes, we have leading up to the 1300s, right? Throughout that time, there's been documentation of travelers who traded and documented their encounters with different people. Okay. So the next stage of anthropological thinking is the age of discovery. So also known as the age of colonialism, okay, by different European countries. So we have the age of discovery for a few hundred years from the 1400s to the 1700s. This is where like England, France, Spain, Portugal went outwards and they explored and exploited different lands and different continents. And then you have massive culture contact that was to a very large degree. It wasn't just your neighboring group of people. These are people from thousands of miles away with different cultural backgrounds. Okay, so these travelers, and these colonists, they explored and exploited different groups of people in their lands, and they documented that as well. Okay, so that's kind of like a part of the anthropological field developing. Okay, anthropology didn't exist at this point. It's just this idea of cultural contact and cultural diversity and talking about it. Okay, then comes the age of enlightenment, beginning in the 1700s. This is where you have major scientific discoveries in different fields of math, science, biology, chemistry. And this is where the scientific method was developing, and this idea of having an objective objective structure in which to study something, and this idea of observing something that's concrete in front of you. Okay, so the Age of Enlightenment kind of fine-tuned this concept of, you're finding new peoples, and you meaning maybe the colonists or colonizer going out, and you're finding new people, so you want to learn more about them from a more systematic approach. Okay, so 1700s, that kind of approach was growing, okay, in terms of understanding difference. And then comes the 1800s. Science, or the field of science, and the different fields of science are becoming more developed and fine-tuned, and there's more voices, more studies being done. This idea of participant observation, specifically in anthropology, started to take root in terms of studying people. And this is where anthropology came from in the 1800s. That's when the field actually started taking shape. Before I continue, I do need a water break. All right. So, since the 1800s is when anthropology as a field started to exist and come into shape, let's focus on that a little bit more. Okay. So early anthropologists in the late 1800s, they were called armchair anthropologists. So if you think of an armchair, here's an illustration of one. Think of like a comfy chair with cushions for the seat and for the back. You're sitting back, you may have your tea, and you're analyzing other people's accounts of cultural encounter. So you're not the one who's going out there studying the people, you're reading about written accounts of those encounters. Okay. So armchair anthropology, you're sitting, you're reading about these and analyzing about these encounters. Okay. Ethnocentrism was a big kind of lens through which these armchair anthropologists studied culture. These armchair anthropologists, they tend to be, the early ones tend to be English and European in general. And so they were using their own cultural background as English folk, as French folk, as Germans, to understand other cultures. They're using their own cultural background to kind of be a standard by which other cultures are studied. Okay. So a few armchair anthropologists to highlight. Sir E.B. Tyler. He wrote, he published in 1871 this book called Primitive Culture. Okay. So in this book, he's credited with giving the first definition of culture. Okay, so that was first published in 1871, first articulated in 1871, and he believed that human cultures went through stages of evolution. Okay, he believed that human groups, and this is in order, they start off in savagery, then they go to barbarism, and then civilization. And because Sir E.B. Tyler and other armchair anthropologists, not just him, operated from an ethnocentric perspective. So he was using basically England as the standard, as civilization, and every other culture that doesn't look like England to be lower than. So he argued that early human groups need to evolve to get to where England is, because that's the gold standard according to armchair anthropologists. Okay. Another anthropologist was Sir James Fraser. One of his seminal works was called The Golden Bough, that was published in 1890. And then he started talking more about or including more humanistic concepts into studying cultures. So he studied myth and religion. And as armchair anthropologists did, they studied not personal work, but written descriptions by other travelers. And so he started doing a cross-cultural study of myth and religion from different cultures, from travelers. Okay, so you'll notice that some of my slides, it's highlighted in yellow. That means that those concepts are found in the textbook, and yellow means highlighted. Highlighted means pay attention to it. It might be on an assignment or an exam. Okay. All right, so moving forward, anthropology did start in Europe then, okay, in the late 1800s, and then in the early 1900s as well. So a very prominent kind of perspective or theory that was carried by these early anthropologists is of cultural evolution, cultural evolutionism, which was mentioned earlier by E.B. Tyler. Okay, so that was a big theory that all cultures go through stages, and each stage is increasing in complexity. So savagery might be what they would consider hunter-gathering. Barbarism might be agricultural, and civilization would be industrial. Okay, so according to the early anthropologists, every society goes through those stages, and civilization is kind of like the hallmark, the benchmark of what culture should be. Okay, we now know that that is wrong and inaccurate, but back then those were things that were not questioned by early anthropologists. Okay. Another concept of early anthropological theory is this idea of function. So early anthropologists understood cultural traditions, cultural values as a response to basic human needs. So that's the idea of functionalism. You're hungry, okay, great. If you live in a certain area, these are the food items that you have available for you. That's why certain cultures have certain foods and other cultures have different foods. So that's the kind of perspective that functionalist anthropologists had early on. Okay. They also had structural functionalist perspectives. So similar to functionalism, where every piece has its role in society, early anthropologists also argued that in addition to basic human needs, there are social structures in place that help create stability. So you have a family structure, you have education, you have the church, you have those different pieces of society that work together to meet the basic needs of not just the humans, but of the basic needs of a group of people of society. Okay, so these are three early anthropological perspectives of culture. So that's in Europe. Let's talk about early anthropology in the United States. So we have a picture here of Franz Boas, who is of German descent. He moved to the United States in the late 1800s and founded the first anthropology department at Columbia University. Okay, so he's known as the father of American anthropology. In grad school, we would call him Papa Boaz. He was a very distinct character. But Franz Boas kind of did a 180 from what the early anthropologists believed in Europe. So instead of having an ethnocentric perspective and judging other cultures based on your own standard of what your culture is, Franz Boas created this notion of cultural relativism. Okay, this idea that cultural traits must be understood in specific cultural contexts. Okay, that means that you have to understand a cultural tradition based on the context of that culture. You have to look at the bigger picture. Okay, so he's saying that there's no objective standard. Comparing your own culture to another culture and using judgmental values, that's not the way that cultures should be studied. They should be studied relative to their cultural context. Okay. He also argued for historical particularism. Okay, this is the idea that that not every culture has to follow this really strict and linear pattern of cultural growth, that every culture has its own complex history, and based on its history, um, they have their own trajectory of what they can change into. Okay. So historical particularism is the idea that the history of a culture is contextualized by individual events unfolding in a limited geographical region. Okay. This rejects the cultural evolutionary model. This says that he's arguing that every culture is unique. Every culture will develop distinctly from other cultures based on their background. Okay. So that flies in the face of evolution, the evolutionary model, where every society has to go through specific stages. Okay. So this new type of anthropology in the 1900s in the United States is really flying in the face of early anthropological thought in Europe. Okay. Soon after, there are Franz Boas has some students who went on and were created their own very important groundbreaking studies. You may have heard of Margaret Mead. She studied gender and sexuality in Samoa, and Ruth Benedict. They were students of Franz Boas, and they went on to think about and promote this idea of anthropology as not something that you can use, the scientific method to study. It's not the same as biology or studying chemistry, that you study things in a more holistic way. Okay, so Ruth Benedict, Margaret Mead, Franz Boas, and all of their descendants from there really push this idea that culture needs to be studied holistically. All right, another big figure in anthropology is Bronislaw Malinowski. He was a Polish-British anthropologist around the same time as Boas. Okay, he turned early anthropological thinking on its head, because instead of reading written accounts by others, he was promoting the importance of going out and immersing with the people to do your research. This is called participant observation. So not only are you going out there and observing people that you're studying, but you're participating in life with them. If there's a custom or a practice that's going on, you're in there and doing it with them, so you can feel it. It's tactile. You can see it, feel it, smell it, touch it, all of that. Okay, so Malinowski is credited on being the founder of anthropological fieldwork, right? Because in order to understand people fully, you can't just read other people's accounts, because it can be biased and limited, right? So he's arguing that to really study a culture, you have to immerse yourself in the environment and the people, and you have to understand it from a holistic standpoint. Okay. So Malinowski is a huge figure in anthropology, specifically with methods. Malinowski did study the Trobriand Islanders, which is a group of people who live in the islands a little bit north of Australia. So he did study those peoples and had different theories, or he argued for different theories. But one of the key things that he contributed to anthropology was the fieldwork or ethnographic fieldwork approach. Okay. All right. So we'll stop there. That's just a sample of early anthropological theories about culture. There's much more. It's much more complex than that, but that's a snapshot. Okay. So let's summarize things. Let's take a look at trends. So this idea of culture, then, if you take a look at this image down here in the PowerPoint, it was very square at first and very simple, right? Culture is, you can only be in certain categories. You evolve from less complex to more complex to, most complex, right? Very structured, very linear, okay? So this idea of culture over time, it became more complex and messy, right? So instead of that cube you see there in this slide, it becomes very diffuse, very messy, very complex. So anthropology, contemporary anthropologists study culture as that messy kind of series of cubes there that you see. Okay. So instead of studying culture as something that's objective, anthropologists now understand culture as something that's more subjective. It's something you experience. It differs depending on what perspective you take. Okay. So early anthropologists had a more ethnocentric approach to studying culture. Modern anthropologists understand culture from a culturally relativistic standpoint. You have to meet the people where they are, understand their cultural values and practices based on their own standards as opposed to your own. Okay. Another trend is that this idea of either or binary thinking about culture, it's either good or bad, complex or not complex, savage or civilized. That idea is old, okay, and not accurate and not true. So um, more contemporary anthropological thinking is that culture is not that black and white. It's messy, it's complex, okay, and it should be studied that way. You should study different aspects of culture in order to get to that complexity, okay. So this is all to say that the overall trend of anthropological theory, the overall trend of understanding culture has become from a simplistic and black and white thinking about culture to something that's more messy, okay, more complex. All right. So we are at the end. So having said that, and thinking about this idea of ethnocentrism, okay, I want you to, for one of the assignments, you will need to watch this video. It's a TED Talk called The Danger of a Single Story. It's delivered by a Nigerian novelist, award-winning novelist named Chimamanda Adichie. And so I watched that video. There's going to be more instructions on what to look for and different questions to reflect upon after you watch it. Okay, so that is included in the assignments part of the Eagle module. Okay, there's going to be a second assignment, reflection activity called Circles of My Cultural Self. Okay, this is actually a discussion one, so it's not reflection, it's a discussion. Okay, so what are the goals of this second assignment? So because we are studying different cultures for the rest of the semester, we can't really study different cultures without self-reflecting on our own. Okay, we need to understand what are our cultural beliefs, what are our cultural upbringing, values, and things like that, that are informing who we are, that make up who we are, and that will affect how we view and analyze other cultures that we'll encounter in this class, okay? So this exercise is very important. It's a very full self-reflection exercise. It's going to ask you to think about your different cultural identities and pick them apart and analyze yourself, okay? In my experience doing this activity, some students are like, yeah, this is pretty cool. And they start, working on it right away. Other students kind of freeze up and say, whoa, I've never had to self-reflect to this degree and think about myself to this degree. I've always existed. I've never had to stop and think about things. So depending on how much self-reflection you've done over the course of your life, this may be a pretty straightforward assignment, or it can be more complex. Okay, so take your time with it. Really self-reflect and sit with yourself. Okay, so that's the reflection part. There is going to be a discussion part. So you will need to respond to another student's submission. So this is going to ask you to kind of talk with another student, self-reflect with them, just basically see how complex your classmate can be in this class. Okay, so that's the goal of the activity. All right, I will stop there. Let me stop the share. Okay, that's a very long That's a very long PowerPoint, but one last thing that I want to share is this, just to review. Okay. Do read over the syllabus, okay, in greater detail. I didn't touch upon it very much in this video, but do make sure to review it. You are responsible for the content in it. Um, and you don't need to memorize it, but just have it on hand to draw from in case you have questions. But do know that on this coming Sunday, June 25th, you will have 3 assignments due. Your personal introduction, which is pretty easy, and then a reflection assignment where you watch the TED Talk and answer questions about it, and then a discussion on an activity called Circles of My Cultural Self. Okay, so if you have any questions, reach out to me, message me. Otherwise, I look forward to working with you in this class, and I look forward to reading all of your introductions and seeing who's in this class. Okay, see you.